Hello, Worship Arts. Again, we're going to use the live feature on YouTube for these. It wasn't the plan for today, but my photo booth, again, was making me re-record things, and that's no fun. So this is live when I'm recording it, but it'll be, of course, posted and rewatchable again to you later as we keep moving forward. So if you're Worship Arts and in class, then please go ahead and watch along in this video. And if you're not Worship Arts, you can stick around if you want to go through John 6. And if you are not want to do that, then you can tune into a video that actually matches your class period. But this is now our discussion of John chapter 6 together. Again, I've got notes that'll be in your digital resources section of this lesson tab on Plus Portals. And then after this video and this lesson is all done, you have a discussion on Turnitin.com connecting to this chapter to be able to have together, reflecting on how the teachings of Jesus in this chapter can impact all of us as leaders of worship, how we can apply it to our faith in our walk with Christ, as well as then how we can be pushed and moved to take the things that we learn and grow in and then use them in our ministry as leaders. So John 6, remember John, we're going to have 7 signs of Jesus's divinity, and we've gotten through 3 so far. And now in chapter 6, right off the bat, we're going to get our next 2, numbers 4 and 5 in our 7 sign sequence. So we're going to get right into it. The first 2 things in here are ones that most of you know from a long time or for a long time from your childhood. These probably were things that you were coloring when you were a kid and in a church service, and you were in the back coloring something during the message. But so with that, I'm going to encourage you, once this is posted, to when you have the ability to pause the video here and then read through chapter 6 on your own, so that then I can kind of just go straight through talking through the things that I want to point out to you all of in this chapter. So John 6, the first section is Jesus feeding the 5,000. This is, of course, a story that a lot of us are incredibly familiar with, and if you're not, again, please read through it. But the feeding of the 5,000 is what we point to as the 4th sign of Jesus's divinity, when Jesus feeds the 5,000. Now, the 2 signs that are here in this chapter, this one's the first, and number 4 total out of the 7. Both of the signs in chapter 6 are meant to show the level of miracle and wonder that Jesus can do, some things that only God could do. But specifically then, things only God can do because God's already done things like this. So chapter 6 is going to have these 2 stories and 2 signs of things that God's already done in the Old Testament that Jesus is then echoing, reflecting, I guess, tying back to, or if you want to look at it this way, that Jesus is continuing as God. So the Jesus feeding of the 5,000. If you're trying to think in your head, what Old Testament story does it sound like? Well, it's something that happens multiple times across a very important chunk of books in the Old Testament. Think of when the Israelites leave Egypt in the book of Exodus. We then have the books of part 2 of Exodus, the books of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, of this whole journey of generations of Israelites who leave Egypt to then go towards Canaan, or what was the land of promise for them. And as they're on this journey through this in-between, this wilderness, there are many, many times where they look up to the sky and they say, God, we're hungry. Did you bring us out here to die? You should have just left us in Egypt where we at least had food. And in all these situations, we look at the Israelites and we're like, why are you freaking out like this? You know God's going to provide. And we understand they're being human. There's times where we have struggle, we have hardships, and we can do the same thing sometimes. So I think it's important to not just look at the Israelites and condemn them for this, but also to think through the ways in which we also can be quick to look at God and say, well, God, why are you doing this? What are you even doing in this? And remember, anytime that this happens throughout the Old Testament, what does God do? God provides, God sustains, God keeps life going. In the Old Testament, in the wilderness, we see God providing the Israelites with manna. God's giving them bread, something to eat so that they can actually survive. And what is Jesus splitting up across all of these people here at this hillside story? Loaves of bread. Jesus feeds the 5,000 just like how God provided for and fed the Israelites in the wilderness with manna. So Jesus fulfills this expectation then of how God would act. The next story, and we have a really short version of it here in John. It's not as long as how the other Gospels address it, but the story of Jesus walking on water. And this is the fifth sign of Jesus' divinity. It says the disciples, they're in a boat and it's dark, and Jesus wasn't in the boat yet, and the sea gets rough and stormy, and they of course are afraid, and then they see a figure in the distance on the water, which makes them be more afraid because it's something they don't understand, something that's freaky and weird. Someone walking out to them in a dark, stormy sea. So they think it's a ghost, a phantom, some weird thing, and it's Jesus. And Jesus says to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." And that's it. Now, I think that's really powerful that that's all that there is in this story, that it's just, all it is just Jesus saying to them as he walks across a stormy sea, "Don't be afraid, it's me." First off, this echoes the Old Testament Exodus story of the parting of the Red Sea, another scenario in which a sea seemed like it was going to be the end for God's people as they felt and heard the steps of the Egyptians hot on their trail, and God makes a way for them across what seems to be an unmanageable or unnavigable sea. So Jesus walks on the sea. I'm reminded of the other line we see in the Bible of when people say, "Who is this that even the winds and the waves obey him?" We see that Jesus has authority over nature. Jesus has authority over the waves, over the storms. So we see a reflection of the Red Sea. We also then see this continuation of God as the sovereign authority over creation, God as the creator through Christ. So Jesus holds the same authority as well. The last portion of this chapter, and it's two, but still all continuing on, it's the bread of life, the words of eternal life. And it's in this story that Jesus is going to be teaching. He's going to do a little bit here, if you're reading through it. He does a little bit of correcting in what can be a little bit of a harsh way sometimes, but then a teaching that then offers this gift of salvation, this gift of grace. So there's teachers and people around him that start to kind of look at Jesus, and they say, why do you speak this way? And Jesus says, "Look, the people who were with Moses, God gave them bread and God gave them manna, and this sustained them and kept them alive. But at the end of the day, or at the end of their lives, those people still died. Now, it doesn't mean that God didn't provide for them, because God did. God fed them. God kept them alive. But eventually they died. They got old, right? To the end of their time. So Jesus says, even if God gives you literal food, eventually you're still going to die. But, and then this is where the gift, the grace, the good news says, but if you hear my words, and if you follow in my ways, well, then you're going to be eating bread that will never go away and that gives you eternal life. Now, this sounds like, and I hope you're thinking this way, this sounds like what Jesus says to the Samaritan woman a few chapters ago, right? Where Jesus says, if you knew who you're speaking to, you'd ask for water and he would give you living water, that if you drank of it, you'd never be thirsty again. So Jesus follows it up then with basically the same type of teaching, basically saying that I have a bread, if you eat of it, you're never hungry, you're never going to die. Jesus, in pointing out that God provided manna, identifies that temporary fix of what was a physical hunger, again, earthly, a temporary hunger. This path that Jesus offers is eternal and it's unending. The ways of Jesus are never going to end. Now, verse 63 of this, it says, It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is no help at all. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. Jesus teaches us and reminds us that faith comes from the work of the Spirit. It isn't something that we're capable of having on our own. And that's not meant to be like critical of us. We're not supposed to hear that as Jesus saying, look, people, you and your earthly bodies and brains, you're not able to have faith in God. So sorry. Instead, Jesus says it in a reassuring way. It says this, that Jesus as God knows that humans in the broken state that we are incapable of having faith on our own. And so what does God do? God sends the Spirit. God sends the Spirit to grow faith in each and every one of us. So it's not completely on us to be good at faith. Instead, it's something that the Spirit grows. So as we then keep going forward day by day, may you be blessed in the reality of that knowledge that Jesus is the bread of life, and continuing to daily have that daily bread, learning and reflecting on and experiencing the words of Christ as we see through stories like the book of John. May those words of Jesus fill you with eternal life. May they fill you with abounding love and abounding peace, because that's what God's offering to you each and every day. That's our John 6 study. God's blessings on the rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.